Let me introduce our afternoon speaker. I had the pleasure of hearing Chris Harris share some of his stories at a private reading one evening, and I was sitting there thinking WICL members have got to listen to these or hear these, and I know you'll enjoy them as well. However, when I first contacted him, he told me that he was very interested, but he was on his way to Europe, so he couldn't go. Well, he's back. Chris began writing stories to share with his daughter about people in their lives and the influence they served. They are very descriptive and entertaining. Chris is the former professor and director of the Willamette University Theater. Although artwork and writing for publications is a relatively new venture for Chris, he has spent a lifetime in design and creative work. Harris was professor of theater and resident scene designer at Willamette University, where he had been teaching until he retired in 2021. Prior to that, he taught for 7 years at the University of Illinois at Chicago, or Chicagoans here. He has designed over 300 productions seen in London, Toronto, New York, Boston, St. Louis, Chicago, and Portland, Oregon. He received a Bachelor of Education degree from the University of Leeds in England. In 1973, he was selected as an English-speaking Union Scholar for Theater Study in the United States, receiving an MFA in Scene and Costume Design from the University of Wisconsin and Madison, my alma mater. So I'm delighted to share with you Chris Harris.
Can I not sit down there? Thank you. There's a part where I've been in theatre so long, I actually don't like being on stages. And this is, and the idea of storytelling actually is connections. And I find this even off-putting. I know for people that have difficulty in hearing, it's necessary. But in fact, anything that mediates the exchange between the live person and the storyteller gets compromised. And so in one sense, I don't like this. I would rather be in the middle. When I was designing theatre, my favourite theatre to design was arena theatre, when the audience were all the way round on all sides and the story gets told to you. Because theatre is indeed storytelling, right? And there's a fundamental thing that we, as human beings, need to do. And it's very old, right? From the very beginning, we can only speculate that cave dwellers would climb out and sit around the campfire and tell the story about the saber-toothed tiger that they just escaped. We take our stories and we create our myths, and we share our stories, and sharing our stories in person is what actually makes me connect with you and you and you and you and you, because although you may not have had the same experience, you've had similar ones, and we form more of a connectedness. I think one of the problems with where we're going right now as a society is that we're so separated. Right? We're in here. We are lost, right? We aren't connected. The number of people I go for a walk in the morning, and the number of people that have got their earbuds in, right, and they're looking down, and I have to step in front of them and say good morning. I have to interrupt, because they're locked in their own world. Storytelling for me is trying to break out of that. As was explained, I started this a couple of years ago because I wanted to pass on to my daughter something about my life in rural England. I was raised in a village of 1,500 people, so that when you're messing around as a kid, they would turn around and say, "Stop that boy, I'm going to tell your grandfather." They knew, they watched you, right? So this idea of this community in which I was raised, I wanted at first to share I was writing it for my daughter. Over the last year or so, I realized actually it's more than that, because I'm realizing now I'm trying to make sure that the people that were in my life, who are long now dead, live on beyond me. And I'm trying, actually, in the process of trying to track down photographs of the people that I'm writing about so that they get attached to the story. So there's another mission going on in my head. But let me just start with it. This was the first one I wrote, actually. It's called Slow Burning Fuse. You're guinea pigs, by the way. Feedback that I get from you will enable me to enhance or adjust what I'm writing. You'll also notice in some of them, I'm giving all these explanations and apologies before I even start. But what I'm actually doing, I have some that meander a great deal. They move into history and then meander back until the story starts to emerge out of the trees. But the first one, Slow Burning Fuse. 1961, autumn. Prone to chilblains, Aunt Rose wore her thick grey woolen fingerless gloves year-round, partially covering her gnarled red and blue fingers. I was uncertain of her from an early age, and half suspected she might be a witch. Suspicions confirmed by her blotchy, vein-lined, wrinkled complexion and her noticeable witchy cackle. But she was always kind and never threatening. But spells can come in an unexpected format. I knew her as Aunt Rose, but really she was my great Aunt Rose. Twice married, firstly to Arthur Christmas, my grandfather's brother. So her name appears on her marriage certificate as Christmas Rose. And then to Percy Dyer. She was twice widowed. Arthur Christmas fell into the River Trent and drowned in mysterious circumstances. And Percy Dyer died when, curiously, or perhaps not so curiously, he fell out of a damson tree and broke his neck. Whenever needed, she assisted William Norris, the undertaker in my village, to lay out and prepare the corpses of deceased locals for burial. Aunt Rose's mystery was further enhanced because it was rumoured that she removed the rings and valuables before the lid was secured on the coffins. But her real source of income was her house, from which she ran a small village store. As was often the case with village shops, they were tiny but sold a little of everything. Her shop was really two small rooms in her home, in the middle of a terrace of narrow row houses with the front door opening directly onto the street. There was no pavement. There was no room for one in the narrow village streets. Her parlour shop was perhaps no more than 15 feet by 12 feet. And the walls were lined floor to ceiling with rickety shelving, groaning under the weight of goods. There were boiled sweets in big glass jars with screw tops, toilet paper, packages of cloth nappies, tea, sugar, knitting wool, sewing supplies, disinfectant, cards, stationery, matches, cigarettes, candles, soap, just about anything that was needed for village day-to-day needs. In the rear of the house was an even smaller stockroom, packed floor to ceiling with cases of goods to replenish the shelves. On November the 5th in England, there is the annual commemoration of the 1605 discovery and execution of Guido Fawkes and other assorted Catholic rebels, who, in resisting King Henry VIII's break with the Catholic faith, history runs deep in Britain, were caught attempting to blow up the Houses of Parliament, along with the parliamentarians and King James. Consequently, every November the 5th, the sky lights up with bonfires and fireworks the length and breadth of the country. In the weeks before the 5th, boys and girls collect wood from fields and hedges and gardens and abandoned barns and sheds, and they heap them into bonfires in their backyard or in a common public area in preparation for the night of the 5th. During this build-up, children made effigies of Guy Fawkes to parade around the towns and villages crying out, "Penny for the guy, penny for the guy." The money thus procured is used to buy fireworks to be let off on the big day. As darkness falls on the night of the 5th, families from the neighbourhood gather to watch the fires being lit onto which the guys had been previously perched. Guy Fawkes wasn't actually burned as a result of his early terrorism. He was hung, drawn and quartered. A delightful execution ceremony that entailed the victim being hung by the neck, then cut down before death, and then drawn, the process by which he is cut open and the entrails drawn out, and then quartered, the process of tethering each of the limbs to 4 horses who were driven away in 4 different directions at the same time. 16th century England were particularly keen to discourage religious dissent in quite memorable and graphic ways. However, the tradition of burning traitors and heretics abounded at the time, and so this minor historical and cultural adjustment was perhaps understandable. The ritual Guy Fawkes burnings were all accompanied by bangs and whooshes of fireworks as the cheering crowds lit the blue tapers of their own rockets, Catherine wheels, Roman candles and bangers. Fireworks for this celebration are sold for weeks in advance of the November the 5th, on the understanding that they will be let off only on bonfire night, November the 5th, an understanding honoured only by its transgression, especially when 11-year-old boys are concerned. It was Saturday, a week or so before bonfire night, and I was idling the afternoon away with my friends Stephen Langton, Michael and Nigel Pulford. Bored, we talked about buying some bangers to let off early, but pooling resources, we only had sixpence between us, not enough to buy much of anything. Then suddenly Stephen Langton came up with a plan. I know. One of us should go down into Dyer's shop with threepence and ask for the fireworks. She keeps them in the trunk in the back room, the storeroom. Then, when they are in the back room choosing a firework, another of us goes in with the other threepence and asks for something in the front of the shop. And then, while she's trying to find this stuff for the second person, the one in the back can stuff their pockets with fireworks. We were intoxicated by this brilliant plan. Yeah, brill! And I asked, so who's going in for the fireworks? Pause. You are. She'll trust you. I pause with all three pairs of eyes on me. This is a test. I blink, I swallow, pause, glance at the eyes, swallow again. Okay. I take a threepenny bit, and conscious of those same eyes following me, I turn and walk towards the shop door. I reach up and then pull down on the door latch and enter the shop. The tink-a-link-a-link of the little brass bell attached at the top of the door ushers me in. Ask not for whom the bell tolls. I can hear Aunt Rose making her way over to the front counter. From behind her shop counter, her rheumy eyes peer at me over the top of her wire-rimmed spectacles. Hello, my dear. What can I do for you? I pause, clear my throat, and tell Aunt Rose I want to buy some fireworks. It is because they are a fire hazard that the fireworks are kept in a metal trunk in the storeroom at the back. Safety standards are minimal and rudimentary in rural England in the early 1960s. She eases her way towards stacked merchandise and comes out from behind the counter, walks me to the back room and opens the lid of the magical trunk. I look at the Aladdin's trove of fireworks one after another, stalling, pretending to have a hard time choosing. As planned, the bell on the door tink-a-link-a-links again. I'll be right back, Aunt Rose says as she turns to the front of the shop. Soon I can hear Nigel at the counter, toying with his attempt to decide what sweets to buy. Grabbing fireworks, I stuff my trouser pockets with bangers and crackers and Catherine wheels, and somehow even 5 or 6 rockets down my trouser legs. The next tink-tink signals that Nigel is leaving the shop. Aunt Rose duly returns to the stockroom. I choose a threepenny banger and follow Aunt Rose to the counter to give her my threepence with difficulty. The rockets hidden in my trousers make it impossible for me to bend my knees. I leave the shop with a ridiculous, comically robotic gait, a ham actor, a King Richard III spider. The door tinks, rings, tolls behind me. I totter and stagger as though drunk on adrenaline and fear up Chapel Street and reunite with my criminal associates. They gather around me to shield my broken, rigid-legged gait as we make our way to the churchyard. Shielded by trees and bushes and tilting gravestones, I unload the purloined swag. My fellow brigands are ecstatic with the haul. Stephen, who had dashed off home to sneak some matches, hurries back, and over the course of the next hour, we let them all off. We light the blue touch paper and drop bangers down pipes, hurriedly capped with damp earth and sod, which blows somewhat dramatically into the air. We light crackers, tossing them on the ground at our feet, and laugh as we skip and jump to avoid them. Rockets are also launched from vertical pipes and fly upwards to burst unimpressively, wasted really in broad daylight. 1 hour of intoxicated glee. Sated after our squandering our plunder, we head for our respective homes and teas. My route passes Aunt Rose's, and I glance at her furtively at her shop, half expecting, Christopher, I want a word with you. There is no challenge. No one calls, but I'm rattled. At home, I uncomfortably eat my tea, all the while expecting a knock at the door. Now I'm scared, terrified that I'm about to be confronted at home with what I had done, terrified that my parents will be told. I'm terrified because Aunt Rose must have known what I had done as I tottered ridiculously, as if suddenly crippled, staggering stiff-legged out of her shop. She must have noticed the suddenly diminished stock in the metal trunk. But there is no knock on the door. Perhaps Aunt Rose is waiting for the next time my mother goes into the shop to tell her what her son had done. Perhaps she plans to tell my grandfather. But nothing. The days and Guy Fawkes night go by, the weeks go by, but there is no day of judgment, no Armageddon, not a word from my parents, not a hint from my grandfather. Ever since I remember, Christmas time, Aunt Rose would call her to our house at the square. Mum and Dad would welcome her in, and she'd join us in the living room, still wearing her fading grey fingerless gloves, and partake of sausage rolls and mince pies that my mother had made, and a glass of sherry or whiskey, or both. And she would chatter and cackle away. That Christmas visit, I can barely take my eyes from her. I'm waiting for her eyes to seek mine as she looks over her spectacles and say out loud in front of my parents, I know what you did. Nothing. Nothing is said. No day of reckoning. Nothing is said that Christmas. Occasionally, my parents demand that I run an errand to the shop, and still Aunt Rose says nothing. She drops in the next year for sherry and mince pies and sausage rolls, and still she says nothing. The years pass. I'm waiting. I want to say something. I want to break this silence, to exercise this haunting. I want to say, I'm sorry, Aunt Rose, but I do not have the courage to do it. I return home from college for my 21st birthday celebration that my mother has organized. During the day, Aunt Rose visits bearing for me a gift. It's a traditional pewter tankard, the type commonly given as a celebratory gift for special occasions. The giving of tankards is and was a tradition in England. I received 2 or 3, and I still have my great Aunt Rose's at my house, here. At this moment, I desperately want to say to her, Aunt Rose, I'm sorry, but I still cannot do it. My guilt is too great. 12 years later, I move and live to work in the US, but distance does nothing to assuage my smouldering guilt. I'm periodically plagued by memory of the theft, and also, almost equally, the vision of my preposterous exit from the shop. I'm guilty of a betrayal of trust. Every 2 or 3 years, I return to the UK to visit family, each time telling myself that this time I will visit Aunt Rose and to tell her I'm sorry. But I never do. I'm still too ashamed. 30 years pass before I finally resolve that this guilt must be exercised. A few weeks after this decision, I fly home for Christmas. On the first opportunity visiting my sister, I ask with feigned casualness, does Aunt Rose still live in the same place? Oh, didn't I tell you? She died in October. I sit stunned. You okay, my sister says? Yeah, fine. She's buried in the churchyard? Oh yeah, next to Nan and Gar and Dad. Later that day, I walked to the churchyard alone, telling my sister I want to visit our parents' and grandparents' grave. I walked to the village and just past the red line towards the church, crossing the medieval old stone packhorse bridge, follow the footpath to where the languid River Devon slides close to the churchyard. It is the same place we let off all those fireworks so many years ago. I pause at the gate in the metal railings that separate the churchyard from the pathway. Slipping the metal catch, I push. The long grass inside the gate resists its opening, but it gives way, rusted hinges creaking admonishment as I push through. I cross the grass to the graves of my grandparents and my father, and to Aunt Rose's grave. Hers is relatively fresh, no stone yet raised. She is buried beside my father and my grandfather and my grandmother. I stare at the mound of brown earth. The weeds and grasses are beginning to take hold of the soil. I stare for some time, a long time, and then say out loud, "I'm sorry, Aunt Rose. I am so sorry." The silence is tangible, but of course, there is no response. There never will be. A crow startles me, laughing from a nearby tree. That's all I get. A cackle from Samuel Beckett's disembodied ham. The purpose of the apology is to acknowledge a wrong, to ask for forgiveness, and most important of all, to receive forgiveness. But I will never hear Aunt Rose say, "I knew, Christopher. It's all right. I'm disappointed, but I forgive you." I stole from my great aunt. I'm still haunted. I'm haunted by my betrayal of trust, the very reason I was the best candidate to steal, because she'll trust you. For this betrayal, committed at around 11 years of age, under pressure, perhaps, to gain approval from my peers, perhaps, to score points for toughness, perhaps, to show I can do it, perhaps. All irrelevant excuses of little or no significance now, because there will be no understanding, no forgiveness. And although over time, owning my crime, telling the tale as a confessional to others, and repeated apologies on visits to the grave, the last one earlier this year, have diminished the weight, I resign myself to the fact that I will never hear forgiveness, or at least acceptance from the one person from whom I need to hear it. Only the cackle from a crow in a tree, a laugh from Ham. It is too late. I will never receive the understanding, the forgiveness that an apology always hopes for. Absolution. The same silence every time I visit the grave, every time I say the words, every time silence. But once in a while, a mocking corvid cackle. That was the start of my life of crime. Thoughts? This is not formal. I mean, if you feedback, you want to do feedback after everyone or not? Or do I just keep reading? Okay, that's fine. Then I'll do it. This is called Broken Birds. Late 1950s. When I was a child, visits to the three aunts who were my father's sisters were always on my part, fraught with some degree of trepidation and mild anxiousness. A feeling akin to the uncertainty I now often feel on visiting someone in a hospital, continually unsure about exactly what to say or do. Like my father, all three aunts were prone to asthma, perpetual suppressed wheezing, ragged breath, soft sentences whispered in broken fragments. Those were my earliest memories of aunts on my father's side, his three living sisters, Auntie Hilda, Auntie Florrie, Auntie Winnie, all short of breath and gasping away in varying degrees, vulnerable, feathered creatures under duress. In my early years, I was always concerned, frightened even, by their precarious fragility, without truly or fully comprehending the reason behind it. I can remember an apprehension on visiting Auntie Hilda and Uncle Tom in their tight, constrained row house on Bridge End Road. Auntie Hilda was one of my father's elder sisters. Uncle Tom, her husband, was a stiff, average-sized man with a high forehead and dark, slightly receding, brill-creamed hair pushed back. It looked like it was retreating from the threat of his clipped dark moustache roosting on his upper lip that seemed to match his clipped, aloof personality. Uncle Tom was in the Air Force during the Second World War and the framed photograph of him in his RAF uniform had pride of place on the front room dresser, just like front rooms over the whole of England at that time. They never had any children, and from the cool way he barely tolerated my sister and me, small creatures that he didn't understand, I don't think Uncle Tom ever wished to squander time on them. Auntie Hilda was a slender, damaged bird woman. In my memory, she seemed to be always wearing navy blue dresses, tightly buttoned at the throat, as if restricting the very passage of air into her lungs. She always appeared to be perched precariously on the edge of her seat. She sat straight back like the chair on which she sat, hands clasped in her lap, wheezing away with short, panting sparrow breaths, as if trying to conserve the very energy required to actually draw a breath. Ironically, and not uncommon in the 1950s, she and Uncle Tom were always invariably smoking cigarettes, players, unfiltered, inhaling the damaging smoke and filtering it somewhat in their lungs. But the front room nevertheless always seemed foggy with a blue-grey haze. In my memory, the curtains on the one window looking onto the street were always drawn. I remember Auntie Hilda trying to engage me in conversation at 7 or 8 years of age, in a low, raspy, fractured voice in that dark, cramped room, smoke-filled. I, frightened that I might, in my response, unknowingly trigger something that would make everything worse, crouched quietly and answered in my own short, subdued, abbreviated sentences as if to match her broken breathing. I was unsure how to respond, desperate not to make things worse, and consequently, because of my obvious fearfulness and hesitancy, I probably did. Auntie Florrie, the eldest of the siblings, likewise of slight build, was another damaged, flustered bird, always soft-spoken and equally often short of breath. She seemed to be always dressed in grey plumage, as if to avoid drawing any attention to herself, also tight at the neck with her tied buttoned shirts. Her head was pulled back as though in faint but perpetual disapproval, and her eyes behind her small round glasses were always cautious and darting about as if looking for potential predators. Perhaps, like me, she was more than slightly intimidated by her police inspector husband, Uncle Noel, another stiff, cold, aloof man, who also, I think, didn't have much time for children, although they had one daughter, cousin Anne. Inspector Noel Ledger, I thought that perhaps he carried a collection of ledgers, multiple minute records of long-stored offences deep inside his jacket pockets. Always looked like he was about to book you for a misdemeanour, or at the very least give you a serious caution. One could almost anticipate him suddenly resorting to the common vernacular British bobby phrase, "Hello, hello, what's going on here then?" as he scrutinised all of failing humanity as the potential criminal class that they inevitably were. I remember Auntie Florrie always seemed to be hidden in Uncle Inspector Noel's shadow, peeking out from behind his elbow, hidden under his wing, protected by his presence, but also overwhelmed by him. She was continually and nervously scanning for Uncle Inspector's responses, a tightening of his jaw, or a glance of disapproval that carried the full and awful weight of the police and the law. Florrie was reminiscent of a reclusive hedge sparrow navigating behind the protection of the spiky blackberry brambles of her officer spouse. Similarly, but perhaps less immediately handicapped by asthma, was round-faced, jolly Auntie Winnie, a plump partridge of a woman. She had been married twice. Firstly, in an apparently family scandalous marriage to the nefarious Clifford Ashworth before I was born, and about which nothing was ever spoken. Then she was married to bloodshot-cheeked Jack Platt, Jack the Lad, a short, red-haired man, in my mind's eye, shorter than Auntie Winnie, playing the part with his ruddy, veined, whiskey-flushed cheeks and ginger moustache, slightly curled at the edges in the fashion of a World War II Air Force pilot, with a slight gung-ho chocks away accent to go with the moustache. He always seemed to be talking slightly out the corner of his mouth in a smarmy manner with a ready, salacious wink. A bit of a rogue, or so he thought himself. They ran a pub for a while just off the A1 motorway near Greetham, no doubt to cover for Uncle Jack's enthusiastic and spirited indulgences. And Auntie Winnie too, especially when Uncle Jack had partaken of more than his fair quota. Heightened jolliness for Auntie Winnie was the result, a protective mask for growing dismay at Uncle Jack's increasingly threatening alcohol-fueled roguishness. The whiskey and anxiety would then, in its turn, bring Auntie Winnie's asthma to the fore, and the excited gasping for breath would begin. Auntie Winnie always seemed warm and generous, welcoming to my sister and I when we made occasional visits to the pub. Not very often, though, because my family never owned a car. I remember a slot machine in the pub that had seemed magical to me as a child. Auntie Winnie always had a collection of sixpences for us to put into the machine, although I seem to remember Uncle Jack less than discreetly reining in her exuberance when he felt that Auntie Winnie's generosity had gone farther than he liked and would reduce the pub profits that he wished to imbibe himself after hours. Another childless couple, Auntie Winnie was over-solicitous, whilst Uncle Jack seemed to tolerate children only under duress. I was certain he would have discreetly nudged us into the path of a combine harvester if no one was looking, and if the opportunity ever presented itself. I always avoided fields in the presence of Uncle Jack. I found out years later that there was one other female sibling on my father's side too, Maudie, born 3 years before my father, who died at the age of 2 or 3 years, probably from asthma, but I don't know. Like most difficult family issues, it was never ever talked about, locked away securely in the memory cupboard under the stairs, out of sight, out of mind. And with no opportunity or invitation to talk about her, and no vestigial photograph to smile at and see, she herself has gone. Vanished from memory, vanished from existence. Just a name scribbled on an old birth certificate and a death certificate. A fledgling bird that died in the nest, her brief story sadly dissipating into the fog of the lost, neglected, avoided, buried family memories. At Christmas, I always got from these 3 aunts and uncles by inclusion, on the gift tag, but not in sentiment, red hardback books with a paper cover that were classic stories, but as a sort of lightweight Reader's Digest children's version. Ivanhoe, Treasure Island, Robin Hood, Gulliver's Travels, Robinson Crusoe. My sister, I remember, got Black Beauty and Jane Eyre and Heidi and Wuthering Heights. Later, as I grew older, the alternative to books for me were pocket handkerchiefs with the initial C embroidered in the corner in blue. Every time the handkerchiefs came, it was always a disappointment, even though they were often accompanied by a few conciliatory pounds. The handkerchiefs signalled innately that they no longer knew what to give me. They no longer really knew me. Books and hankies for Christmas from the mostly childless aunts. Mostly childless because in my mind, Auntie Florrie must have been arrested and searched by Inspector Ledger at some point, and as a consequence there was a miscreant daughter. Although fun to read, and read I did, the books were not exactly exciting toys. Not like the chemistry set, and the beginner electrical set, or the Meccano set from my uncles on my mother's side. After my father died in my middle teens, the trips to see my father's sisters slowly diminished. Ironically, looking back now, those uninspiring gifts had more permanence than all those other more exciting toys long ago exhausted and broken and assigned to the rubbish bin. Those books slyly impregnated me with a habit, an addiction for the printed word and reading, and in a way set me on a meandering path that led to a life in theatre and academia. Even those pocket handkerchiefs have become a haunting habit. Those very handkerchiefs somehow followed me across the globe and are now very regularly in my back pocket 65 years on. I smile when I fold them carefully, making sure that the blue C is visible on the outer fold, and put them into the back of the pocket of my jeans. I just wish I could thank them now and acknowledge that of all my many Christmas gifts, theirs are the ones that truly stayed with me, marked my habits, significantly and indelibly marked my life. I wish I could let them know that what they did had a profound impact on the person I became. But it is too late. After I left to go to university in the early 70s, I rarely saw them again. And now those 3 bird sisters have permanently flown. Looking back, I realize I have no idea of when and where they died. Like the birds that were regularly at my garden around the bird feeder, then suddenly at one point during the weeks of winter, when I'm not paying attention, they were gone. Succumbed to cold or diminished nourishment or a predator, but not there, just gone. I suddenly became aware of their absence, their lack of presence, their lack of being. It must have been in those early years when I'd been studying in America. Suddenly, my 3 aunts were not there anymore, taking flight during the winter months over the course of several years, quietly gone, vanished in the frosts. You're very patient. This is called Beating. 1963, autumn. I was excited. My friend Peter Scott had managed to get me hired to assist on a shoot on the grounds of nearby Belvoir Castle, home of Lord John Manners, the Duke of Rutland. As a choir boy at my village church, from the age of 7, I had always been entranced when Lord John Manners and his regal, statuesque wife made their periodic, requisite, dutiful church attendance in their specially reserved pew. Usually, to be honest, only Easter and Christmas. When they attended, I would stare, fascinated, entranced, from the choir stalls at the elegant and mysterious couple in their designated front row pew. Lord John in his black cashmere overcoat with a red silk scarf, and especially Lady Manners in her svelte designer outfits, perched on her unimaginably slender high heels, sometimes even bright red. This time, for the first time ever, I would be going up to the grounds of their castle residence that looked down over the Vale of Beanview. A little historical and nevertheless important digression. Belvoir Castle was built on an escarpment overlooking the vale in which my village was situated in 1067 by Robert de Todany, a Norman French baron, and William the Conqueror's standard bearer in the Battle of Hastings the year earlier in 1066. I'm sorry. A castle built, no doubt, for the purpose of oversight of the newly subjugated. Even after the battle in which King Saxon Harold was purportedly killed by an arrow in the eye, it took many brutal years for William to suppress the outward rebellion and resistance of the Anglo-Saxons to French rule. The name Beaver, spelled B-E-L-V-O-I-R, comes from the French for beautiful view, Bellevue, Belvoir, right? History has it that the local Anglo-Saxons couldn't pronounce the French and called it Beaver. But I like to think that perhaps they were asserting their defiance of the conquering French with the grievous and malevolent mispronunciation which still persists to this day. History, cultural expectations and obligations ran and still run deep in rural England. Much of the Vale of Belvoir is still owned by the Duke of Rutland, bequeathed ancestral lands handed down for almost 1,000 years. My village of Bottisford was even identified as Bottlesford in the Domesday Book of 1086. Compiled by King William the Conqueror, the Domesday Book, spelled D-O-M-E-S-D-A-Y, is indeed named after the Day of Judgment in Christianity. The name comes from the Old English word dom, which means judgment, hence Domesday. Because much like on Judgment Day, when people's deeds were definitively assessed by God with no appeal possible, the Domesday Book was considered a complete and unchangeable record of land holdings and serfdom at the time, presumably with no appeal possible. The name, of course, was assigned by those who had been surveyed. After finally exerting most of his control over England, King William's intent was to record all the land in his relatively recently acquired kingdom, assess how much it was worth, who owned it, who he could award it to as a reward, and, most important of all, how much tax he could charge from whoever owned it. It was a meticulous and detailed accounting that included every serf, goat, and plough in every village and their value. Already in England, in the years that followed soon after the French invasion of 1066, the bureaucrats and the managers and the accountants were making their mark. Fealty, obligations, expectations are being set down and recorded. And sometimes, as a consequence, discreet and unrecorded, sullen, sly dissent. I met my friend Peter Scott in the spring of 1961. We had both taken and passed the 11+ exam and found ourselves on the same daily bus ride to our new school. The 11+ was taken at that time by every child in the United Kingdom at 11 years of age, and it essentially directed the future of each child by placing them on one of 3 educational tracks. The exam was a screening process for essentially a part of a tripartite system which established 3 types of secondary schools: grammar schools, focused on preparation for university studies; technical, to educate inventors, scientists, engineers, and the technicians of the future; and secondary modern, to train for practical skills and prepping students for supposedly less skilled service jobs: car maintenance, electrical, plumbing, and home management, whatever that phrase meant. As such, it was established as it was towards the end of World War II. The 11+ was conceived as part of the process of opening up access to the higher levels of secondary education to children beyond the established upper classes, but also to children from all socio-economic backgrounds. Consequently, at 11 years of age, the dice were rolled, paths were set. By chance, it's almost always by chance, I passed the exam and was assigned with a few select children from my village to ostensibly be prepared for university. This required us to attend the county grammar school at King Edward VII, 15 miles away in the nearby market town of Melton Mowbray. There were closer grammar schools, 7 miles to east in Grantham, but Grantham was in the county of Lincolnshire, and I lived in Leicestershire, and so, in the infinite wisdom of county officialdom, Melton it was. Going to school in Melton meant catching a school bus at 8 o'clock every morning in my village in Pottersford, and it was on that bus that Peter Scott and I formed a friendship on the hour-long ride that meandered circuitously through the scattered villages in the Vale of Belvoir, scooping up the chosen few. He got on the bus 3 miles down the Vale at Red Mile, another long-established village identified in the Doomsday Book as Redmeld, the place of the Red Earth. History runs deep. It was during our conversation on one of those bus trips home after school in the autumn of 1963, Peter mentioned that he had committed to serving as a beater for the Duke of Rutland on the coming Saturday. Peter also said it was really good because you earned 5 shillings for the day and they gave you lunch too. He asked if I'd be interested in the work that Saturday because they were short a few people and he could get me on the crew. Intrigued and excited, I agreed. And the following day, on the bus ride to school, Peter informed me that I was on for beating. I was to ride over to Red Mile, leave my bike at his house, and then we would be picked up and taken up to the grounds of Lord John Manners Castle for the start of the beat. Peter told me to dress warmly, but in clothes that didn't matter, wellies, Wellington boots, if we had them. So that Saturday, early on, a brisk but sunny day, in my wellies, I eagerly pedalled my bike down Barkston Lane over to Red Mile. From his house, together, we walked over to the Peacock Inn, an old public house built in the early 1700s, where a gang of several other scruffily dressed boys came straight out of Charles Dickens. I half expected the Artful Dodger to introduce himself and charge me for protection. Soon after 9 o'clock, a Land Rover pulled up and we all piled into the back. After a short drive up towards the castle, we turned into a recently harvested field, where several other Land Rovers were parked with a collection of 20 or so other boys and farm labourers, similarly clad in work clothes and wellies or boots. Many had their work pants stuffed into their wellies or longer woolen socks if they were wearing boots. We were then directed towards a dense woodland copse off to the side of the field. Once there, we were instructed to clean a 3-foot stick each, and then, when we were ready, walk in a straight line about 6 feet apart through the copse woodland. As we walked, we were to make vocalized sounds and whack at the undergrowth on either side as we slowly negotiated the scrub brush of the wood. Whack, 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 yip, yip, yip. The vegetation, and especially the blackberries, would snag on your clothes, and sometimes holding the line was difficult in the denser vegetation, especially for a 13-year-old boy. But you were expected to push your way through and hold even spacing in the line. Hey, keep up, boy! Our semi-military formation and our vocalization was soon enhanced by the distressed scurries in the underbrush, as woodland creatures were driven forward by the ever-encroaching line of boots, sticks, and yips. Suddenly I was startled by a volley of bangs as the shotguns greeted the fleeing creatures, rabbits, a few hares, partridges, and pheasants, emerging from their cover in the woods, driven forward by us from their shelter. And then shortly after, the cracks of the guns, the spatter sound of what at first I thought was rain, until glancing up through the autumn vegetation at a clear blue sky, I realized was the rattle of lead shotgun pellets pattering down on us through the drying autumn foliage. As our line of beaters, so called because we beat the undergrowth to drive the wildlife towards the shooters, emerged from the woods, I could then see opposite us another line of figures, evenly spaced farther ahead across the field. As we got closer, I could see that a few were similarly clad in their wellies, but theirs were designer green and not utilitarian black. And instead of rough worker clothes, they wear faux worker clothes, expensive tweeds with contrasting leather elbow patches, flat caps, woolen breeches, and +2s. Many were in autumnal-coloured woolen stockings and brown brogues and roll-necked Shetland wool designer sweaters. The Duke of Rutland and his associates. They were clucking and squawking to each other in their designer hedgerow plumage, exactly like the very partridge and pheasants they were so intent on shooting down. In their hands, shotguns, with which they would trace intently but slightly ahead the trajectory of the startled birds in flight before pulling the triggers. 2 shots from each gun. At their sides, their loaders with a second gun, nestled in the crook of their arms, cocked open as a safety precaution. These were speedily passed to the shooters after the first gun had been fired and exchanged as the shooter reached back with their discarded weapon. Without looking, their eyes being fixed on the sky for quarry, the shooter felt the empty weapon being put into his hand and perpetually reloaded and then would snap it shut. Repeat, repeat, repeat. The occasional rabbits and hares that broke off to the side between the line of beaters and shooters were quickly dispatched by gamekeepers. To complement their appropriate ensembles, the shooting party also had a designer pack of thoroughbred gun dogs, tails erect, nose pointed, poised, as intently enthusiastic as their owners. Upon release, these dogs dutifully and joyously raced back and forth, retrieving the variety of birds and animals that lay on the ground, some still twitching and flopping around, and returned the bloody prizes to in their mouths back to the gamekeepers. The 13-year-old in me stops suddenly and stares at the carnage to which I am contributing. Move on, lad, get your ass moving. The head beater had no time for pausing. I quickly scramble to catch up to the line that continues to troop diligently across the open fields towards the guns, and the Land Rovers now reassembled at the foot of the field beyond them. By the time we have completed the march across the field, the first of our kills have already been tied to the previously naked frames of the Land Rovers that normally support the canvas covers of the vehicle. The prizes from the chute are hanging by their legs, dangling with the first of the blood gently dripping from their half-open beaks and mouths. Hey, boy, get in the back. We ain't got all day. We're wanted down road. I scramble into the back of the vehicle, trying to avoid the occasional drops of sacrificial blood, and I try to make even more of a point of avoiding to look at their glassy, cold eyes. But I cannot. They are suspended on 3 sides of the Land Rover frame and demand that I bear witness to what has been done. I cannot avoid the accusatory stare of those dead eyes. We drive a mile or so in convoy to the site of the next massacre. Fall out, line up, step forward, whack, whack, yip, yip, scutter, scutter, bang, bang. Again, the sudden whirring flutter of launching ground birds is abruptly cut short in mid-flight by a preemptive shotgun blast. I hear the crack of the shot, and watching the birds, I hope the shooters have missed. Not so. The sound reaches me before the shotgun blast tears at the bird and knocks it out of the air in a flurry of fractured wings. The few that do escape one shooter, the few that do escape one shooter are soon brought down by another. Bang, 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 bang. Tumbling, broken, silent birds careen down to the ground, accompanied by the pitter-patter rain of lead pellets. After the next round of mayhem, we stop for lunch. We are plied with big, bloody roast beef and tomato sandwiches, and even though we were way underage, a bottle of warm beer each. Unlike some of the more seasoned beaters, I avoid getting back on the seats at the back of the abattoir Land Rover to eat. I prefer to sit on the ground. Peter joins me. Isn't this great? Good beef sarnies too. Yeah. I don't know what else to say. While we eat our lunch and drink our illicit beverages, I dislike the bitter taste of beer, but I'm aware of the need to conform. I discreetly observe Lord John's shooting party. They are partaking of a variety of considerably more refined fare. Along with roast beef, they eat pork pies, sausage rolls, bread and pâté, salmon, smoked, olive oils, some drink sloe gin, champagne. I listen in on their over-enthusiastic Yahoo hunting banter. Last week it was a full bag. I myself bagged 2 dozen. Bloody good outing. I bought myself a new Purdy last year, much preferred to the Churchill. Personally, I like the Holland and Holland with the Prince of Wales grip, easier to handle. Painless locks with the familiar hand-detachable levers. Blah, blah, blah. This conversation means nothing to me. It is a foreign code, a different language. I know not of what they speak. I am not of this, and more to the point, I increasingly have no wish to be. After our lunch, we are transported to the next drive. Once again, the line forms up and marches forward implacably in formation, with its stick weapons swinging, into the rain of the shotgun pellets rattling down into the stubble and autumn vegetation around us as moments after the shots are fired. Looking back now, there is, in my mind, a disturbingly uncanny parallel. In another field, turned to mud, in another country, just 60 years or so before, young men, including my grandfather, were commanded by upper-class officers to walk stoically in the same determined line in the Somme. Even though in that autumn field in 1963, we were not the target, and we were not stopped in flight, careening forward and falling broken to the earth, nevertheless, in retrospect, the synchronicity resonates. At the end of the day, we drive away across the stubble fields into country lanes away from the chute, our Land Rover bearing more than 40 butchered animals. They sway gently, hypnotically, in harmony to the movement of the vehicle. I glance at the other 6 Land Rovers, all with the same. Another successful bag. Over 250 animals in one day's shoot. The canopies of all our vehicles are made of dripping cadavers of slaughtered animals. For what? For food? Possibly some will impress Lord John's guests at his dinner table this winter. Possibly some will be given to the loaders and the gamekeepers. But not really. That's just a byproduct of this killing spree. It is because this was sport for the upper classes, the landed gentry, the Duke and his brothers in arms. Although as a naive 13-year-old, I was shocked and repulsed by the casual brutality of what I had witnessed, to which I had also contributed, something else also hatched. Something else also registered. I collect my 5 shillings for my day's services, and after a hurried goodbye, I solemnly cycle home. The rise and fall of my feet on the pedals make my pieces of Judas silver jingle in my pocket. As I'm riding, I glance down and notice dark spatters on my sleeves, spots of blood that have marked me christened me. I have been literally and metaphorically blooded by this experience. Peter asks if I'm interested in another shoot. A few weeks later, I make up a reason to decline. And after my second polite refusal soon after, Peter stops asking, and perhaps to the relief of both of us, our friendship drifts gently apart. Upon reflection, I think that deep within, this was possibly the nucleus of my increasing disdain for the expectations of class distinctions in British life, even a beginning rudimentary sense of socialism of sorts. There, beneath the gently swaying, bloodied bodies of trophy animals, I had felt judged by their sightless eyes and condemned by their blood, but my growing repugnance was also christened by the red benediction. In the back of the Land Rover, the seeds of other questions and rejections begins to take root. A rejection of decisions, long histories, going back centuries, deep-seated traditions, social rituals, class expectations, property allocations, and assumptions of fealty instigated 1,000 years ago. That following Christmas, a few months later, when Lord John and Lady Manners attends midnight mass, something has changed. I have changed. The cashmere overcoat, the red silk scarf, the red high heels seem to have become scuffed, soiled, tainted, tarnished. The mesmerizing magic, the awe, has faded. I recognize now that at that moment I began another beat to something else. I was beginning to beat my own retreat. The consequence of the 11+ exam conceived to open up education and society has had an impact on one youth that no one foresaw. It had opened up my eyes and put me on another path.
Agree? Yeah. Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we can come back and, excuse me, have some questions. Okay. Would you like to take some questions or continue reading and save questions till the end?
Whichever. I mean, I'm quite happy to, if people want to give feedback now, that's great, and then I'll read a couple of others, and then so whatever works. There's a part where it's probably better that it's not my droning voice all the time. So, I'm quite happy to take questions or comments or suggestions or whatever there. Oh.
Go for it.
Right
here.
Over here,
Yes.
This is Don. Remind me again the purpose, what motivated you to start writing these down, something about family.
Well, I mean, I started, the first story, actually the one about stealing from my great aunt, it came, I used to teach a introduction to theatre class here, and when I took it over, I started to try and change. Oh Lord, put this somewhere else. I'm wowing. Stop. Their final assignment, I changed the way the class was. It used to be history of theatre for introduction. It was really boring. And so I started just giving them short scripts to play, and I wanted to get them acting, I wanted to get them directing, and then the final project was a playwright. They had to write a short autobiographical monologue. And the assignment was, and they were all terrified when I said this, the classes would stop at the mid-semester point, and then from then on, I would meet them all for 30 minutes every Tuesday, one at a time. So I spent the whole day teaching the class, right? And because they worked separately. And I had made a commitment to them, or they made a commitment to me, that they had to give me one evening at the end of the semester when they would have no conflict. They had to be there because this is when we do the performance. So, what I ended up doing, because and the assignment was, I want you to meet with me, and individually, on a piece of paper, write down 3 of the most transforming, hurtful, stunning moments in your life. What do you think is most profound? And then when I would meet with them, I would say, which one's the one you don't want to talk about? Because that's the one I want you to do, right? What's buried the deepest, right? And so before I did this, here's my story. And I would tell them just orally the story of my great Aunt Rose. And then we would meet, they would do this rehearsal, and I would direct them and help them refine their script. And then we would meet at 6 o'clock on this designated evening. And sometimes we went through till 2 in the morning performing at places around campus. They had to find a location. And it was, for most of them, it was profound, right? They would open up themselves, and they would realize that whereas they were many times classes you had to slide to the back, they all had to stand in the spotlight and own something of themselves. And I think that's partly the owning of yours. This is who I am right now, and this is maybe what I'm struggling with. And I had abuse stories, I had rape stories, the stuff that actually, thank God I'm not teaching anymore, because I'd have had to report it, right? But I had things about grandfathers with Alzheimer's challenging their granddaughters with shotguns. I mean, it was a range of stories that were just mind-blowing. And then at the end of it, I would say, now, do you realize this class met and shared these stories, and they were potent, powerful stories, and this was all in this classroom. Imagine how many stories there are on this campus. Imagine how many stories there are in this city. Breathe. You're not alone, right? This empowers them. And so that story is where I started. It was originally to sort of let my daughter know a bit about myself. She's been to England, she's been in the village, she knows it, but the village has changed. It's big and expansive now, and it's suburbs and all sorts of stuff. But I wanted her to know a little bit about it, and that's where I started. Where I ended up, which is what I said at the beginning, was I want to try and, in honor, if I give my gift back to my great Aunt Rose, if it's anything, she lives on beyond in the story I tell, right? And I think that's part of an obligation to carry things forward. So that if I get to it, the next story I was going to read is about the doctor. So, right. And it's a magical story for her. And I've found her photograph. And whether I turn this into some sort of book, because I've noticed I've started each of them with a date and a season, so usually, and maybe it's a collection of, I don't know. But if I do, I want to get the photographs that go with it so they live on beyond me, right? So, no, you're welcome, sorry. Yes. Oh, I'm back first, sorry.
Hi.
Yes.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
This has been great. Thank you. I'm so entertained. But I'm wondering, are you in touch with the other, like your criminal compatriots? And do they help you kind of process that story and remember it, and also kind of get a little cathartic forgiveness? No. The three other criminal associates in that story mentioned, Stephen Langton, Nigel Pulford, and Michael Pulford, I haven't seen since I left the village to go to college, and I don't know where they are. I do have connections with students I went to university with, and last spring I went and had a reunion with some of the surviving people from grammar school that I'd not seen in 40 odd years, more, 45, 50 years, I forget how many. I mean, and that was delightful. The ones from college, and there are, well, actually one has died now, but there are 4 of them now, that I always contact, and I won't hear from them for the whole year. I might get a Christmas card, and I send one back, but I don't meet with them. I get off the train, and I arrange, they say, well, we can put you up these 2 nights. I go stay with them, and 5 minutes of conversation, and it's like we've never left. And it keeps going back, and it's such a reassurance, right? So, yes, sorry.
This is Ken. I don't wish to put you on the spot, but I was wondering about your philosophy of storytelling. For instance, my father always said, never spoil a good story for the sake of the truth. Do you follow that?
Not really. I mean, which is why I'm asking, what did I spoil? This is what the chance to share the stories, and for people to say, well, you shouldn't have done this. And sometimes I'll get advice, you're repeating yourself here, this is a repeat, and this is a repeat. But in fact, the repeat is part of it. There's a difference between a written text and an oral text. And the repeat becomes part of a motif, a poetry repeat. So actually, I don't edit out the repeats, even though I was advised by a very close friend to do that, right? But in fact, I don't, because the oral part needs that dance that comes back to a word or a phrase, and just to let it land and settle. So, I mean, I also have friends here that will actually say no, edit. They've helped edit these and written and changed stuff, and I go, okay, this makes sense. So, and these every time I do this, I mean, I sat down and rewrote some of these last night. I was going through them and I end up finding out that I have to read it out loud to myself, and then I make an adjustment based on the oral. I have sort of a written text and an oral text. And this is getting to the point in my computer. It's called getting to the point, oral, oral, oral. It's the number of times I've rewritten it, right? So it's a process of refining and winnowing. But I don't have a set of rules. I play with humour, right? So there's a part where there are things in there that are me playing with the idea or teasing the listener with an idea that repeats. Or me looking back and laughing at myself, right? So that's a part of it, but I'm not conscious of being that deliberate about it. It just starts to flow, and then I try and send in the weed whackers. Yeah.
So my...
Oh, sorry, no, go on.
I am first, okay. My name is Franca. So my question is, I saw a pattern, and I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but it seems that in the UK or in England, there are class, but there are, everyone is within a binary, whether it's so-called working class as to people with so-called titles. So is that was deliberate, or it just came out naturally?
No. I mean, that was a part of the beating experience was a change. At the time, I was a member of the Young Conservatives, because everyone in the village were members of Young Conservatives, and it was a farming community. And then there was a point when I dropped it all. I just came, and it was that experience of shooting those creatures, and was horrific. And that's when I began to say, wait, and then the path moves on. I dropped out of church when I was 16. My father died when I was 15, and he was a very deeply religious man. He was going to actually be a missionary in Africa till I turned up and mucked it all up. But he was the one that instilled in me a lot of fervent belief. He installed me in the church choir, which I was in through until I was 15 or 16. And then I found myself questioning structures, right? And I slid to sort of agnosticism of sorts. And there is a part I wish I could talk. My father, as I say, died when I was 15. And one of my regrets, and maybe this is a story I have to write, is that I will never, ever hear him say, "I'm proud of who you've become." Because I wasn't emerging, I was just a colt gambling around. And I'd like to think, I'd be deeply disappointed I've lost any sort of religious affiliation. But I also got from him impregnated, rooted in a moral code. And I think I'd like to think he'd be proud of that, but I'll never know. I'll never know. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jim.
Yes.
I'm enjoying your stories very much, and I especially appreciate they're very different. Each one of them does have a morale to it or a moral code, and that's important. And I could relate to all of them. I laughed when you talked about the conversion or transformation of Beaulieu to, what was it, Beaver?
Yes.
Beaver,
Yes.
because I used to teach in Hastings and Cornwall, or,
Yes, yes,
all
yes.
different,
Yes.
and we had Bewley, the car museum, and my students who were all French speaking, it was a great lesson for them to see how language can evolve.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is,
You're there, I think.
this is Cassia.
Yes.
First of all, your stories have a great sense of place and a style about the English life 70 years ago or thereabouts, and that's coming through really nicely. What's also coming through, at least in the stories you've read so far, is there's a real sense of loss and also a sense of personal anxiety, and so I'm wondering, did you ever get over the losses and did you ever get over the anxieties?
Well, maybe the answer to that, if we get time, maybe the answer to that is in this story, which was about the death of my father, and how this organism dealt with it. It's pretty grim, but I mean, dead rabbits to my dead father. I mean, okay. So.
Why don't you go ahead and read the story, and then if there's time afterward, we continue with the...
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
I'll read two. The first one is called Getting to the Point. This is spring, 1962, spring. It was well publicized in the village, so my mother insisted my sister and I should get the smallpox vaccination. I was not interested. I, probably like most children, found the idea of inoculations of needles piercing my skin horrendous. But my mother insisted. She told Julia and I that we would all three go together, presumably under the assumption that the prospect of jointly and simultaneously sharing pain and anxiety with my mother would somehow reassure me and make my dread easier to bear. Needless to say, that was delusional on my thinking on my mother's part. It did nothing to alleviate my fear and anxiety at all. But perhaps it worked in another way, because the obligation got me there, if somewhat more than dourly. In Britain, the Vaccination Act of 1853 had made it compulsory for all children born after August the 1st, 1853, to be vaccinated against smallpox during their first 3 months of life. Parents who failed to get their children vaccinated were subjected to a fine. Obviously, 110 years on, not only had my mother and father failed in their social and legal obligation as parents, but they had apparently avoided being discovered and fined for their negligence. Possibly my mother's sudden enthusiasm was precipitated by the possibility of poor medical records and law enforcement finally catching up in rural England, but that I will never know. My mother made the obligatory announcement, and then the definitive announcement. We cannot cancel, Christopher. We are expected, done and dusted. And so I was. Then she and my sister went back down on the appropriate evening to Dr. Wall's surgery by the Winterbeck to get our inoculations. I recall that the smallpox vaccination was given in a group of batches. I think there were 6 people, although I cannot be sure because I was in a fully committed, indulgently sullen mood. Although she was relatively young, it was hard to give her an age because Dr. Kathleen Wall, the local village doctor, had suffered the effects of a mismanaged major cranial surgery a few years earlier in 1956 that had paralyzed her on one side. As a child, it was most disconcerting being faced by Dr. Wall. The sight of one eye was gone, so she peered at you with her head twisted to one side through a pair of transparent pink-framed spectacles that had the right eye blanked out with a white opaque lens. The right side of her face was slack, and when communicating, she was forced to speak in a heavily salivated and slurred, incomprehensible hissing tone through her mouth, which was drawn down and immobile on the right side. In her tweed skirt and jacket and brown-laced, sensible shoes, Dr. Wall gave a very respectable caricature of a female Frankenstein. This image was even more enhanced by the fact that in order to move independently, walk was not the appropriate term, but independently definitely was, Dr. Wall needed 2 forearm crutches with braces that hooked into her upper arm to support herself as she swiveled her hips to enable her to drag her weakened right leg to move forward. Crutch, step, swivel, drag. Crutch, step, swivel, drag. The slow and arduous movement of a seriously broken but tenacious insect determined to cross the floor. Another veritable and dangerous, threatening but formidable Richard III caricature. Moving independently on her crutches was not Dr. Kathleen Wall's only insistence on dignity. Formerly right-handed, through sheer determination, she taught herself to write and give injections with her left hand. She was equally determined to make the medical house calls upon which a rural medical practice was devised. In his garage, my grandfather had further modified for Dr. Wall an AC Invacar. This was a compact but ridiculously looking single-seat, 3-wheeled vehicle with a light blue fiberglass body on a trike chassis with 1 wheel at the front. It looked most precariously balanced and likely to tip over at any sudden turn. It is actually quite outstanding that, probably in response to the number of former servicemen disabled in the Second World War, the British Ministry of Pensions distributed these Invacars free to disabled people from 1948 until the 1970s. Upon consideration, that vehicle was an ideal reflection of its precariously balanced driver. But this crippled vehicle enabled Kathleen Wall, seriously handicapped but ferociously proud and self-reliant as she was, to drive independently to see each of her patients in their homes as needed. Looking back, I'm not sure, heavily modified as it was, that this particular individualized vehicle was even a legal form of transport, especially for a one-eyed doctor who was equally physically compromised. In fact, as I write this, I discovered that all regular Invacars were recalled and destroyed in 2003 due to safety concerns. But at that time, in my village, no one, local police included, ever acknowledged that it might be a problem. In keeping with one-eyed Dr. Kathleen Wall, the local police, too, turned a blind eye. Force being the questionable term in my village, this compromised only of Sergeant Taylor and Constable Jack Live. Kathleen Wall's broken appearance belied the fact that she was greatly beloved and much respected. So much so that she was awarded an MBE for services in the community many years later. MBE, the most excellent order of the British Empire, is a British order of chivalry, rewarding valuable service. Although that meant very little to me at 12 years of age, staring at drooling Frankenstein armed with a sharp instrument of torture. Staring pointedly at the targets with her one working eye and slack, drooling mouth, Dr. Wall gave each of us in her surgery a left-handed inoculation from the same vaccine batch. I actually don't remember it being a needle because I wasn't looking, but my head was determinedly averted. I remember the pain and the consolation sweetie from the inevitable tin of Quality Street on the corner of her desk, intended to buy my snivelling silence, if not my acceptance. I do remember the scar that formed later seemed to be a circle with a cross in it. I later learned that the inoculation was given with a bifurcated needle that made multiple punctures in the skin. A visible scar was supposedly the sign of a successful vaccination, a method known as scarification. I really want to say I was scarred for life, but that wasn't exactly true. I want to say the vaccination was successful, and that was true, but only partially. Less than a week passed after the inoculation, and suddenly I became very hot and feverish. My mother kept me home from school. Over the course of the next few days, I got severe aches and began to develop blurred vision. Concerned, my mother called the doctor's surgery. Dr. Wall being out of town, her associate, Dr. Brown, a frail, white-haired elderly man with an equally frail white moustache, which was hanging on to his upper lip for dear life, made the house call. House calls were common, especially in most rural practices in the 1960s. The National Health Service, springing out of the commitment to a wide and relatively generous social service net after the Second World War, ensured that medical coverage was readily available, widespread, and most importantly, free of charge. Britain was the first Western country to offer free at the point of use medical care to the whole population. A brief soapbox statement I will indulge in. I still firmly believe that the mark of a civilized country is its willingness, by pooling resources and funds, to take care of all regardless of circumstance. All, the young, the old, the disabled, the poor, those handicapped by circumstance. Take care means free healthcare, free education, free social services, infrastructure maintenance as needed. Meanwhile, I, the narrator, indulged in a minor political interlude. Dr. Brown slowly climbed the stairs to my bedroom on the second floor of the council house at the square, a block of dozen semi-detached brick council houses built by the government and rented at a minimal charge around a large open square of glass. With his milky, rheumy eyes, Dr. Brown gave me a cursory examination, took my temperature, checked my eyes, and pronounced my ailment influenza, and gave my mother medication to reduce my fever and instructions for me to drink lots of fluids, and left. Dr. Brown left, but my fever did not. Not only did it stay, it got worse. My temperature rose higher, and I was perpetually drenched in sweat. I became delirious, and my vision moved from blurred to becoming distinctly double. I saw two of everything, reminiscent of the joke effect of crossing your eyes as a child, except this was a trick over which I, frighteningly, had absolutely no control. Desperately anxious, a few days later, my mother again called the village doctor's surgery. This time, Dr. Well, who was now back in the surgery, came to the house call. Even though I was semi-delirious, I can still remember the clatter commotion as Dr. Well insisted on visiting me in my bed without assistance from anyone, negotiating the narrow, twisting council house stairs on her crutches. A doomsday insect clatter creeping her way up the stairs and down the narrow corridor to my small bedroom at the back of the house. By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. She mechanically and maniacally maneuvered her way along the passage and rattled through my bedroom door, and after some noisy clanking adjustments, perched herself precariously on my bed. She fixed me with her skewed, slack-jawed, monocular stare, although now, in my delirious state, she had two good left eyes and two right opaque lenses. Taking the temperature, a cold stethoscope on the chest, a protracted examination of my eyes, and then the spider doctor scrambled as she repositioned herself up and back onto her thin auxiliary metal limbs and rattle-hustled out of my room. To the susurration of hushed conversations in the hallway, I fell back into sleep. I awake to the double vision of my two mothers ushering multiple pairs of men in some sort of identical uniform into my room. Even in my delirious state, I'm startled and worried, but my mother doubly reassures me. I'm lifted out of my bed and strapped onto a stretcher, and then somehow the double pairs of identical twins maneuver my 12-year-old body on the stretcher down the narrow, twisting stairs, bumping against the walls, then out the front door into the rain, and then into a vehicle with a multitude of flashing lights, an ambulance. We take off into the wet night, sirens howling in the rain, in harmony with my own demented wails. I fall asleep or pass out, in and out of consciousness. I'm aroused by the process of being transferred by identical sets of medical twins, moving in choreographed unison onto a gurney in a bright room. I'm crying. Gentle hands remove my pajamas and turn me onto my stomach, and then I'm suddenly aware I'm being strapped down, legs, arms, chest, with supplementary hands to make sure I'm held steady. I cannot move, I cry. Needles are pushed into my arm, and then another somewhere in my back. Hands stroking me and hushed voices trying to reassure me. One woman sounds foreign, heavily accented. Reassuring voices don't help. I'm immobilized, I'm drugged, I'm crying. Then I can feel something heavier, sharper, being pushed into my back. A pointed stick, a steel rod, a needle. It stays, it does not come out. I cry, I pass out. I awake hours, days later, alone in a bright room with a solitary bed and with a small single window to the outside. The sheets are white and cool. I move in and out of consciousness. Time passes. I have no idea how long. I ask for my parents. I'm told soon. I'm fed soups and broths a little at a time by cheerful pairs of identical nurses, all in white. Crisp white short-sleeved blouses with identical cuffs turned up, duplicate white sharply folded little hats, duplicate white skirts, white starched aprons with pairs of little watches attached upside down on the left breast of the aprons. Even most of the nurses are white, although there are a few to break the rigid colour scheme. Everything is so bright, it hurts the eyes. Over the course of the next day or so, I'm slowly feeling more comfortable and begin to settle into a pattern. The double vision has eased. And gradually, over hours, over days, I really have no idea, the Tweedledum and Tweedledee nurse teams have faded away into single individuals as my vision eases into a softer blur and then eventually clears. Suddenly, I'm told my father and mother will be visiting. Soon after, they materialize outside the window of my room, together in the small frame, as though in some vitrine-distorted talking snapshot. They are in a tiny Harry Potter-esque mirror of Erised. I'm perplexed. Why can't they come in to see me? Soon, I'm told. Every day from then on, in the late afternoon or evening going forward, my mother and father visit me. They talk to me with distorted voices through the hermetically sealed window for the next several weeks. Mirror, mirror on the wall, talking to me as though they're through their framed glass for half an hour, sometimes standing, huddled together under a dripping umbrella as the sky cries around them. When can I come home? Soon. Since they don't have a car, their visiting times are usually coordinated to matching the train schedules back from Bottisford to my village and to Nottingham and back again. I ask what has happened. What happened to me? They don't seem to know much. Either they don't know, or don't want me to know, or don't want to court disaster by giving it a name. But I'm also sneaky. One day when no one is around, I slip out from between the cool white sheets held tightly in place by hospital corners. One curious residue of my stay at the hospital is the habit I still have of making my bed with hospital corners. I slink barefoot down to the foot of the bed. I have noticed the clipboard that is continually being scribbled on by doctors and nurses hooked to the bottom of the bed. I see my name written in someone's handwriting in the space next to name at the top of the page, and in the box outlined in the adjacent blank space opposite is the scrawled word encephalitis, a foreign word. I have no idea what it means. I ask my parents. They don't know, or at least, more accurately, they say they don't know. A week, 2 weeks passes. I have no real measure. There is no television in my room. Reading is not easy, but I'm given pencils and paper to draw a little and a plasticine to model and make figures. I try to emulate the plasticine ducks that my father was always so adept at crafting from the modeling clay. As I write and visualize this, I suddenly recognize another hidden manifestation of his delicate artistic sensibility, another thread that ties me to him. I have grown accustomed to this daily ritual of nurses, of pills, of breakfasts and lunches and teas, of regular glass-encased parental visits in the magic mirror in the fading light of the day. Then suddenly, one morning, a surprise. I'm told I will be going home that very day. That afternoon, I'm dressed back in my own clothes and wheeled to the front of the hospital, out into the air by a nurse and a sister. The wheelchair is an insistence by the nursing staff. And then, with a succession of affectionate pats on the arm and a final wave, I am released to walk slowly to my parents, to their embrace. An embrace I have not felt for what must have been many weeks. To an embrace under the open sky, with swallows looping around in apparent joyous celebration of my freedom. One of my uncles, Peter, drove us back to my grandfather's house. Without much real exercise, my legs are somewhat weak and my balance is not steady. I was under strict instructions not to rush, but to walk slowly. I agree. When we arrive home, I walk slowly from the car into the familiar green double doors of my grandfather's garage, but then suddenly I see my sister peeking out behind the wall leading to the garage office, and then out to the back to the house. We make eye contact, and then she rushes away. Instinctively, I run to chase her, and suddenly my body is not yet fully attuned, and the muscles are not strong, and like an uncoordinated, gangly newborn colt, I nearly crash to the oily garage floor. I only just regain my balance. I'm embarrassed by my lack of coordination, by my obvious sickliness. I'm scolded lightly by my mother, but I will not make that mistake again. I am pointedly reminded of my frailty. It is good to be home. The fire is going in the 6-foot-high, black-polished, cast-iron grate in the parlour of my grandfather's house. The big, dark oak beams that run the length of the parlour are low and in their way known and comforting. I sink with relief into the old, overstuffed, worn brown leather chair that looks from the garden behind over to the light slipping away on my grandmother's flower garden, and beyond that, my grandfather's vegetable garden. Tea and toast done on a toasting fork, and then hot, buttered, and smothered with my nan's homemade lemon curd. The warmth, the smell, the lowering dark beams. I am home. I am safe. It is a slow climb back to normalcy. I do not return to grammar school for another several weeks. When I do, it is obvious that I am hopelessly lost in my classes. The decision is made by my parents and the headmaster, Mr. Boris Brewster, that I have missed too much vital schooling and that I shall stay down a year and simply start again. That resolution feels like a failing, and at first it feels somewhat shameful. But it turns out that this decision is a gift. In the repeated second year, I score in the 90th percentile in all my exams that year. I go from less than an average B grade student to top of the class A. I become form captain. I fly on a trajectory that carries me forward for the next several years. The effect begins to fade inevitably, as in the upper class forms I settle back a little closer to my academic level. But the personality has also changed. A confidence and an awareness that carries me forward. This awareness is also compounded by changing circumstances and new information, which leads to an enhanced or at least further adjusted perception on my part. Less than 3 years after my hospital incident, my father died suddenly of asthma with bronchial complications. He was a temporary resident at Lawsby Hospital, a medical facility specialising in mental issues, and was in the process of being assessed for the stress and anxiety that triggered his asthma attacks. His sudden death, a sudden disappearance, was a sharp and chilling shock that left me numb. A few years after he died, my Aunt Lyd, neither my mother or dad had ever talked about what had really happened with me, shared with me details that my hospitalization was the result of a severe allergic reaction to the smallpox vaccine. It gave me encephalitis, not encephalitis. My amateur sleuthing misread the handwriting. Encephalitis is a severe swelling of the brain. On that gurney, that first night in the hospital when I was strapped down, it turns out they were doing a lumbar puncture, a spinal tap, a procedure that involved extracting cerebrospinal fluid from the spinal canal to drain the fluids out of my spine and presumably from my brain. My Aunt Lyd told me after the procedure my parents had been told by the doctors that they would not know if I would live or die for 3 days. For 3 days, my life was balanced on a knife edge. And so also for 3 days, my parents were balanced on their own knife edge. My parents had not been allowed to visit my room because I was in an isolation facility. They had been forced to watch me through their own magic mirror. That information about my hospitalization shared by my aunt startled me, but also heightened my awareness of how immeasurably lucky I had been. Lucky that Dr. Wall, my determined, clatter-palsied insect village doctor, had insisted on clambering up to my room on her supplementary mechanical libs to realize what was really going on with me. Lucky that Kathleen Wall got me into hospital in sufficient time for medical staff to make the attempt and succeed in extracting the damaging fluid from my spine. Lucky that Boris Brewster had the foresight to hold me back for a first year of study at grammar school. What a gift I had been given, to start again. That was partly an academic restart, but also, perhaps more significantly, a social restart. It also precipitated in my late teens a sharp appreciation of how precarious and fragile life is, my life and the lives of those around me. And yet, at the same time, because of this new information, I have also a discomforting thought that perhaps, in a way, my survival balanced on the edge might have been in some way at my father's expense. That as a consequence of my illness, he was balanced on his own blade of anxiety. Somewhere in the back of my head, I cannot help but wonder whether his anxiety, and therefore his asthma, wasn't compounded by the overwhelming strain of dealing with the trauma of my hospitalization. Somewhere in the casual drift of things, there had been a disconcerting trade-off. I was given the miraculous gift of a restart, but there was also a price to pay. This is where I start putting faces. This was Dr. Kathleen Wall. She saved my life, for better or worse. And ironically, this was her just before the operation. The transformation. Yeah. Second story, or where are we at now? Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Then questions, possibly.
This is probably very inappropriate question, but are you an anti-vaxxer?
No, not at all. No. I mean, I've got used to shots now, but no. Sign me up for everyone. Always. No.
Yes. Sure. We have the time.
Hi, this is Solveig. Stupid question, but this was all on the national health, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I never paid a thing. No, my parents never paid a thing. No.
Yeah, I couldn't remember when that was made universal.
No. It had been instigated soon after the Labour government took over after the Second World War.
Ah, okay.
And they initiated it then. 46, I think, if my memory is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
This is Bill. Listening to your story about the beaters, I was reminded of the film by Francois Truffaut, The Rules of the Game.
I haven't seen it.
And it's about social classes, and it's based on a Jean Renoir book, and it has a very vivid scene, just like you described it.
There is another film, I'm trying to think, it had John Miles in it, and it had a lot of the same sort of shoots. And perhaps, because I was drawn in by chance to being a beta, I got to see something that normally I would never have seen. And it was just, oh. And a disgust, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that in the village, someone would snare a rabbit or two and make rabbit pie, right? One of the stories is about Johnny George, and when I was 7 years of age, stumbling across him because the gate to the slaughter at his yard where he was butchering the sheep, and watching fascinated as he would whip these sheep over and gut them and skin them and hang them on the hooks that were in the butcher's shop. So I know, I'm not squeamish, I'm grateful that to me, meat is something that had a heart and was beating, not a thing in a plastic dish with some saran wrap over it, right? I know what meat is. And I eat it, and then I went pescatarian for a while, and then I realized I was contributing to overfishing, so you can't win. So I don't eat a lot of meat, but I do eat a little. But But this was different. This was just, it was obscene. Yeah, it was sport.
Thank you for your stories. My name's Mark.
Yeah.
And the purpose for telling these stories is very clear. You wanted to introduce your daughter to
Yes.
your childhood, but it seems like maybe you could expand that a little bit, because you have great stories from your youth, but you have a much bigger story to tell beyond. Have you thought about expanding?
Well, one of the things I'm realizing, and that's why I said I put the dates there, there's a part where, okay, and then what? I started something called the casual drift of things, because how come this kid raised in a rural village with 1,500 people, I would never have seen being here, a professor, on the West Coast. I mean, how does this happen? And it's things that happen, and it's not, you can make some choices, but it's the doors that closed sometimes that cause me to go, oh, well, that's not going to work. I'll go off this way. And then embracing that. I think it's great. I think there's a line in Bertolt Brecht's Threepenny Opera. Jonathan Jeremiah Peacham turns around and says, make yourself a plan to get you to the top, make yourself another plan, and let the whole thing drop. Right? Which is, to me, about being open. If you have a goal, and you're determined to do it, and you lock in on it, and it doesn't work, you are tortured in hell, misery, right? Whereas my attitude has increasingly been, okay, so now what? Right? And I welcome the randomness. And so one of the things I'm starting to write is this casual drift of things. It's a phrase from John Gray, who's an English philosopher. I think he's still alive, but I haven't checked lately. But it's straw dogs. So
that does capture other parts of your life and stages.
Yes, I mean, where did I put it? Is it here? I brought the Doomsday book, by the way, if you want to read it. This is what I think. This is interesting, right? The ancient Greek. This is John Gray. This is where I picked up this casual drift of things. The ancient Greeks were right. The ideal of the chosen life does not square with how we live. We are not authors of our lives. We are not even part authors of the events that mark us most deeply. Nearly everything that is most important in our lives is unchosen. The time and place we are born, our parents, the first language we speak. These are chance, not choice. It is the casual drifts of things that shapes our most fateful relationships. The life of each of us is a chapter of accidents. And I go, yeah. If I look at it all, it's all accidents, right? The accident, if my mother hadn't insisted on the inoculation, then I wouldn't have got encephalitis, and then I wouldn't have stayed behind and done all the classes all over again, and then. Chance.
This is Brenda, and I had a quick question. Do you come from a family of storytellers? Did everyone sit around and tell stories, or is this unique to you?
No, not at all, actually. There's a part where I wish they had been. My grandfather was in the Somme, in the mud and the gas, and he survived. He never brought it home. He never talked about it, and I wish he had. Part of me now, I mean, he died before I had the presence of mind to sort of ask him, right, and say, tell me, share your stories. No. And perhaps part of the thinking there is, we don't bring this back. That is horrific. We do not bring it back with us. We don't want to taint our families and our livelihoods. I suppose I can understand that if I'm projecting. But no one tells lies. But that's different.
Yeah. Just a comment. I'm Helmut. Any of these stories, some can be very commonplace. And there can always be very truthful. It's the social commentary where you put yourself into it and comment about what your experience or seeing, whether it's with the nobles, the blue bloods, or this or that. That's what I find interesting. You can take almost anything and develop it with commentary.
See, that was one of my I appreciate that, because one of my questions was, is this superfluous stuff, litter that doesn't need to be there? But I end up wondering, going, okay, thank you. Yes.
I want to thank you again for coming and sharing your stories, and I know there are more there, and thank you all for your questions.
Thank you. I appreciate your patience. Thank you.